I'd like to call the regular meeting of the Lane County Board of Commissioners back to order for Tuesday, June 12th, January. June 12th felt like January on Sunday.
Yeah, it did.
2018, and we are in our afternoon session, and our first item of business is under County Administration, item 14A, which is a discussion in the matter of presenting the third quarter fiscal year 17-18 financial report and Lane County's current employment situation and forecast. And we have Christine Moody, our Budget and Financial Planning Manager, and Brian Rooney, our Regional Economist from the state of Oregon. So welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair.
Or good afternoon.
Take it away.
Good afternoon. I started it. So I will just quickly go through the quarterly financial report piece of this, and then we'll turn it over to Brian so that he can focus on the economic data that he has for you today. This is the third quarter of the current fiscal year, so a couple months ago, but it does take us a while to get the data all completed for the months. So both of the, well, I'll start just with the national. Maybe we did still continue to give you some national economic data in the report. Just things around CPI, national employment, and inflation. All of those are staying fairly steady from what you've seen in the prior quarters. Inflation was about 2.4% over the year, but then we'll leave all of the local economic indicators that we typically go through in the report with what Brian's going to present to you. So as far as the budget to actuals comparison, we are still well within target, positive in the whole county budget, and then also the two funds that we focus on, the general fund and the road fund. I will note that we are seeing that the vacancy variance that we implemented in the 17-18 budget has been successful. We don't have any budget concerns about needing to do any appropriation increases anywhere in the general fund at all. So, but we are seeing just slight changes in the percentages year over year because of that vacancy variance, which is what we wanted to see. We want our budget and actuals to get closer together in that way. As far as the road fund, I do want to mention the highway fund money coming in that I think you've probably heard from Tanya a time or two since the beginning of the year, is that those revenues are coming in slower than the state originally projected. So we're waiting to see where that indeed ends up. But that does potentially change projections going forward as that new revenue comes in. So unless there's any questions on the quarterly financial part, I know you're just probably eager to hear the economic data.
Any questions on the quarterly financials from the board? I don't know how eager we are because I took a quick peek at the slides.
Sorry.
So sort of good news,
Yeah.
somewhat.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Okay. Well, first of all, the title's a little misleading because I don't have any forecast in here. The last time when I was here in January, I presented the forecast numbers, and that's 2014 to 2024. We're going to have new forecasts out. We're shooting for June 26th. It's been kind of a moving target, but we'll have a forecast out soon, and that should be, it is 2017 to 2027 when we do that. So no forecast data in here. This is pretty much an update. Since I was last here in January, we updated employment numbers. 2017 has been benchmarked with more accurate data. And then the housing market data is moving along, and there's been some small shift in that data. So first, I'd like to remind everybody that Lane County's economy is diverse. We have the University of Oregon in government. We have a little higher percentage of manufacturing than the nationwide. We've become a regional health services center with the Peace Health Hospital, everything that goes with that. Also, Mackenzie-Willamette has expanded, and we have Peace Harbor down in Florence. And then we have our normal amounts of local industries in retail, trade, and construction. And we have a little higher percentage in leisure and hospitality than the national. A diverse economy.
Hey, Brian, just a quick question. When you have mining and logging as 1%, are those direct jobs. It does not include like a job in a mill would be under manufacturing.
Right. Those are people who are claiming a paycheck or getting a paycheck in logging and gravel mining, mostly logging.
Just wanted to clarify that because there'll be people that will say, look, there's only 1% of our economy tied to timber, and that's not exactly true.
Right. Wood products manufacturing, and then there's also quite a bit of transportation associated with forest products. So I think the National Forest Research Institute, their latest number for Lane County is 7,000 associated with forest products.
Thank you.
So Lane County, this is seasonally adjusted non-farm employment. Lane County lost a lot of jobs in the recession. 11.4% of its employment was hit quite a bit harder than statewide, which was at 8.5%. The jobs lost were gained back in January 2017, and that was part of the update that we did with the most recent employment numbers. Before the update, we had estimated that we had gained all those jobs back by November 2016, so that was pushed ahead a few months. The employment gains weren't quite as much as we had estimated. Lane County is now 3,300 jobs, or 2.1% above its previous peak. And with that, manufacturing is still way down, gained back about 25% of the manufacturing jobs that we lost in the recession. And we've gained back about 60% of the construction jobs that we lost in the recession. So the goods producing sectors kind of lagged coming out of the recession, and most of the gain has been in service producing, a lot of it in healthcare.
Can I submit real quick?
Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Brian, on the manufacturing piece, do you have data at all to, as far as, we talk about jobs, but how much of those jobs may have been replaced by technology, automation? Do you have any data to support that or not support it, or anything out there to kind of gauge that?
Not necessarily how many jobs, but what we can do is look at employment per output. We now have GDP for the metropolitan area for Lane County. And we can look at jobs per output. And I've looked at it for wood products manufacturing.
Yeah.
And we're getting a lot more output per job as a percentage of the GDP produced. So there's an example. I could look at other manufacturing sectors, but wood products was especially interesting to see how that played out. And a good portion of those lost jobs are because of technology.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Okay, so over the past couple of years, employment growth has been slowing. The peak in the current recovery was 2015 at 3.5%, and that's very strong employment growth. The decline in the growth rate of employment, or the decline in the growth in employment percentage increase is likely due to a tightening labor market. We have very low unemployment rates. Employers are having a harder time finding qualified people to fill the jobs that they need to fill. So it's likely that it's a labor or a supply constraint in the labor market. Here are the industries that have been growing between 2016 and 2017, and these are benchmark numbers, so these are very accurate. And we can see that the goods producing industries, construction and manufacturing, and to some extent mining and logging, have been growing. Construction in particular has been growing very rapidly over the past year and a half. When we look at the service producing industries, information is down because of layoffs at Symantec. Also, print publishing is in there, and print publishing has been kind of drifting downward for the past decade because people are getting their reading material from the internet. Professional and business services is largely temporary firms and call centers. We've had some losses in call centers, but the temporary firms have been doing really well, and that's kind of an indication of the overall economy. Those temporary firms hire people for a broad range of industries, but especially construction. Health services continues to grow. It's just had steady growth for the past 20 years or so. Leisure and hospitality has been, had strong growth all through the recession, and it's possible that leisure and hospitality benefits from an aging population. People retire, and if they have enough money, they travel and go out to eat a lot. Government is up a little bit. Actually, that's a pretty small percentage change for government, if we were to represent it as a percentage, because government's a big sector. And I looked at it, and it looks like it's a little gain in state government, a little gain in local government, and it's not in education, it's in administration. So a couple of small gains there. So that's what that gain in government is. Unemployment rates. This was adjusted also. April's unemployment rate was 4.2% before we adjusted the numbers for last year. We thought that we had a record low unemployment rate. We thought it was 3.8% last May. That was adjusted upwards to 4.3%. So this past April's 4.2% is the new record, going back to 1990 when we started doing seasonally adjusted unemployment rates for the counties. Oregon statewide rate, 4.1%. The U.S. unemployment rate, 3.9. These are very low unemployment rates, and we're comparable to other areas of the country. Okay, so for the housing market, we want to compare income growth to housing cost inflation. First, 2016 was not a very good year for income growth. It didn't meet inflation. Inflation was higher than wage growth. For 2017, it picked up a little bit. Annual average wages were up 2.7%, and average weekly earnings were up about 4.5%. So at the rate of inflation, maybe a little higher. So far this year, the average weekly earnings are flat for the first few months of 2018 through April. So we'll see how that goes. We're still up over the year, but it seemed like 2017 wages perked up a little bit. This hasn't been updated, but I looked up some more recent numbers, and this is from Zillow. This is Zillow data. And so we have average apartment rent growth was 9.3%, and this is August 2016 through August 2017. Most recently, the over-the-year for rent cost increase is over the year April 2018, it was 5.8%. So it's slowed a little bit. That housing cost inflation, as far as rents is concerned, has slowed a little bit. Here's something that doesn't change much with, as long as income growth is slower than housing cost inflation, this number is going to increase. At 55%, we have a relatively high rent burden, and rent burden is defined as people spending more than 30% of their gross income on rent. With the housing data, there is an update also. Between August 2017, the over-the-year rate was 11%. In April 2018, over the year is 8.6%. So again, we're seeing some slowing in the housing cost inflation. I think in the financial report, they used the multiple listing service. It was 7% over the year December 2017. So the indication is that those the housing cost inflation has come down a little bit, and that wages perked up a little bit in 2017. So housing cost inflation is still more than wage increases, but the gap between the two is narrowed a little bit. One of the reasons that we have housing cost inflation is because we have population growth. This is 2016 to 2017. We had 4,660 people, or a net population increase of 4,660. And almost all of it's from in-migration. The natural rate of increase is very low. The average annual population change from 2010 to 2017 is 0.7%. You can see last year is 1.3%. So we're having increasing in migration into the county. 2017 building permits is an update, and there wasn't much help there. Single-family home building is trending upward, but we had very little multi-unit building permit activity in 2017. So if we're getting, 4,000 to 5,000 people move to the county, those building permits should, a back of the envelope estimate saying, you're going to have around 2 or 3 people per household. To keep up with population growth, we would have to have somewhere around 1,300 to 1,500 new units each year to keep up with the current population growth. So we're not meeting that at this point. Okay, this is the published things that are happening and going to happen. The top of the list there is SentinelOne, a cybersecurity firm moving to downtown Eugene, expects to hire 50 people and could double by 2020. That's really good news, and one of the reasons they moved here was to take advantage of the people who are getting laid off at Symantec. They were able to pick up some skilled workers that way. Still not sure what's happening with the big building out there in West Eugene. Northern Golden Foods, that's kind of old news, but it's good news. I'm not sure where they are with that, but they're supposed to employ 75 people eventually. The Knight Science Center is currently under construction, so for the next couple of years, it's going to help construction employment. Then after that, that's an increase of some high-paying jobs and is a benefit to the University of Oregon, which benefit the entire community. Bartles Farms out there near Veneta closed. I was a little surprised. I didn't realize 142 people worked out there, but.
Well, it's not just the slaughterhouse out.
Oh, it's the
They
retail.
also had a packing plant in West Eugene.
Right.
So that's
Yeah.
why it's such a large amount and surprising to people. They
Yeah.
didn't realize they also had a packing operation.
Yeah. There's some property that maybe somebody will want to use in the future.
Last I heard, there was another firm interested in picking up their packing operation.
Yeah, I'd heard some of that. So there's some hope there. Arcimoto, that's kind of old news, but good news too. We're seeing them ramp up production and ramp up, they're published that they're ramping up employment. So, we're seeing some broad-based growth, but we're also seeing some high-paying jobs in manufacturing, software, and at the university. So, that bodes well for the future. Even if we have slower employment growth, it looks like we're going to have some quality jobs coming up in the future. So here's my contact information. And again, we'll be publishing a new forecast in the next few weeks. And if we have any questions.
Sure, I'll start. So, it's interesting, we see that we're starting to taper off in job growth a little bit, and we said that's really more about workforce. And we've got potentially 4,000 people moving in the area, but we're not having enough building permits and all that stuff, so that, you're seeing all those data about price of homes and rent, going up way beyond wage growth. Do you see our lack of workforce, which is also partially a result of our lack of housing, is that more the driving factor right now that's constraining our economy from continuing to grow? Is it really all about housing and workforce, or is there something else underlying that's also driving that?
Well, the low unemployment rates come about because of strong employment growth, but also retirements. We have a lot of baby boomers retiring, and when somebody retires, it creates a position that needs to be filled. So the labor force goes down a little bit there, and so that provides some opportunity there. But yeah, it's just, we've had strong employment growth for several years. The unemployment rate comes down, and it's at a very low, record low levels. So we're starting to see supply constraints, and this is what happens in the business cycle. You get inflation, people start doing really well, and then you start getting constraints, and the inputs into the economy start becoming constrained. Right now, we're seeing labor, but we're also starting to see logs are constrained for one reason or another. But there's a lot of demand for wood products. So, we start seeing the inputs into the economy become constrained, and that slows things down. Interest rates go up, investment goes down, and that's part of the business cycle, and that's how you get a cyclical recession. So I don't know, did I touch upon, answer your question there?
I was kind of, looking for, really
How much housing?
how much housing has influence on that starting of the turn down, and if we could, if we have the ability to turn knobs as a political body, if we could do as much as we can to turn up housing supply,
Right.
would that have the most impact economically for Lane County, or is there some other place we ought to be looking to turn a knob?
It looks like there's an imbalance there. There should probably, for the rate of population growth, there should, it's not me to say what policy should be. There's an imbalance there. Also, in this recovery, we're not seeing the wage growth that we would normally see with these really low unemployment rates, because employers should have to compete for workers and offer higher wages. And that's not happening so much. And the reasons for that are somewhat of a mystery. I've heard productivity is down in the past. Increases in productivity, floated all boats. And I've got to believe that health insurance inflation is probably keeping wages down a little bit, because, I know my employer, it's a real rub between providing health insurance and wage increases. So that would be another thing I think that would help the economy, is people seeing those wage increases that they normally see in this phase of the business cycle when unemployment rates are very low.
So I've got one more, but I'll wait.
Just to
Go ahead.
just to jump in and ask a quick question, is there a date? Is there a month and year when the next recession begins? And do you know that date? I mean, is there, are we talking 2 years?
Yeah,
What are we?
everybody right now is saying early
consecutive quarter.
2020.
Everybody who's an economist, I
Everybody
think
who's
you
an
should narrow
economist.
that down. Not
Right.
everybody, but.
But I think the reason for that is more that, without a shock, there's hardly any way we could have a cyclical recession, that wouldn't be at least a year and a half off, probably longer, because, the Federal Reserve has got to raise interest rates. Long-term rates have to go up on their own. We really have to see the supply of loanable funds be restricted or be constrained. So the consensus now is 2020. There are a couple of things that could kind of force a worldwide recession. Trade war, so-so, messing with NAFTA might do it, But as far as the business cycle goes, most economists who probably know better than I do are saying sometime in 2020.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Farr?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rooney. Great presentation, by the way. I'm loving it. I'm focusing on housing right now and wages, and I'm reading these, see if I'm reading the, under the housing market segment. The first slide talks about average wages, annual wages in 2017 are up 2.7%. And then it says average weekly earnings increased about 4.5. So annual is 2.7, weekly is 4.5. Can you explain that?
Yeah, they're two different data sets, and the 4.5% comes from payroll data, and is probably more representative of how an individual industry is going up or down. The average annual wage is just total payroll divided by the number of workers. So that can change by the change in industry structure. And so what I think is happening there is we saw some increase because of the growth in construction. But no, I really can't get to the big, between the difference between the two data points. It's just, they're both up.
And so I'm going to use a 2.7 for this purpose. Then I see the Lane County rent growth is 9.3 in 2017. That's the apartment.
Right.
growth.
And as I said, that the latest rent growth figure in April is 5.8%. So it seems to, the housing cost inflation seems to be slowing a little bit.
Down. But the year 2017, we had a, what is that, a 6.6% differential between wages and rent increase.
Yes.
Now, here's a rhetorical question. Where does a family find that 6.6%?
Right.
I'm not asking you to answer that, but they're required to find that 6.6%. So Commissioner Bozovich is asking which knob we can turn. And I don't know if there are knobs that we can turn to change that. But the fact is, housing continues to get out of the grasp of people living at or close to their means. And what that means to us all is that when we're trying to find housing for people who are homeless, and people are being put out of homes on a regular basis. If your rent goes up $300 a month, and you don't have $300 a month, what is going to happen?
Right.
Are you going to join that statistic?
It's particularly hard for people on the margin, but even if you're not on the margin, it's less disposable income that goes into the economy. It all goes to housing.
Yeah.
So.
Or you
affects the
cut
economy.
corners other places. You cut on childcare. You go into debt.
Right.
You cut food. And that's not what this presentation is all about, but it really is a part of the illustration that I personally try to make, and I'm not the only one, is that housing, what the cost of housing as compared to wages is doing to the poverty rate in Lane County, and the number of people who are living absolutely on the edge. The number of kids, right now, the numbers are something like, I think it's 19.7% of kids in Bethel are homeless in Bethel schools. Now, how can we live with that? Now, once again, that's not this presentation, but it really is a part of the illustration that I try to make on a regular basis, is that we're putting people on the street, expecting them to live, and expecting them to not bother us outside that door, and we're not giving them homes. Okay.
I would point out also, this touches upon middle-class families, and inflation overall is pretty subdued, but that's because manufactured goods and energy are pretty cheap. Food, energy, manufactured goods. But when it comes to middle-class families, we have housing increasing rapidly, health insurance increasing rapidly, and the cost of higher education increasing rapidly.
And if you toss in the other major expense that families have, childcare, which is raising rapidly also.
Right.
So, and there are certain things that you can't cut on, so you end up cutting things that affect the quality of your life pretty significantly.
Yeah. And as I said, the disposable income comes out of the economy and goes into that inflation.
Precisely. Thank you.
Mr. Sorensen.
Do you have any countywide employment data or unemployment data by educational attainment?
Yes.
Is that difficult to send us in an email or?
No, it's not.
I think it would be helpful, at least for me, and maybe you could just email it to all the commissioners, of what we have record low unemployment. Now that is misleading if you're unemployed, right?
If you're one of the 4.2.
Yeah, if you're one of the people that don't have a job, so your unemployment rate might be 0. I mean, 100%. So, but I'm just interested in the basics of countywide, not Eugene, not Springfield, not Florence or Veneta or whatever. I'm interested in just kind of countywide data to illustrate, and I think it's great you you're coming in quarterly to help us out here, because a lot of people watch our video, and we get this information out this way to the public and opinion makers both. So I'm just curious, within that 4.3% that we were hearing about as an overall unemployment rate, what's the unemployment rate in the, let's say, some high school graduate, some college, four-year college, that type of educational attainment data that would, because I feel like sometimes it's the basics of economic development that are the most important part.
Yeah.
Get people better educated, they're more likely to earn more money. But
Deeper in debt.
and they might be deeper in debt. That may be true. But overall, if the goal is Lane County wants to have an economic development policy of having people that make more money, well, one way is pay them more money. Another way is to get them educated so they are capable of earning more money. So I'm interested in that feature where you just tell us the unemployment rate is, higher among, I'm just guessing, people with lower formal educational attainment, and the income levels are higher, or the unemployment rate is lower among people with higher. Now, that may not be true for every single person, but that's why I'm looking at it in aggregate of all of Lane County's population that's included in the workforce.
I'm not sure at the county level, but you said employment data. I thought you meant overall employment data, or, population data even. When we're looking at unemployment rates, I'm not sure we can get into that detail at the.
Would that be a state level data?
Probably state, definitely national anyway. But
Yeah.
I think we would have that state level.
Because we have heard sort of generalizations, oh, wow, all those people over at the University of Oregon that are majoring in art history and getting their master's degree, oh, gee, they can't find jobs. Well, yeah, that might be true, but what about people with master's degrees?
Yeah.
What about people with high school education, so that I can tell my nephew, it is important that you graduate from high school.
Yeah,
You will make more money if you
We have
graduate from high
national
school.
data that, shows that people with a bachelor's degree or better have very, like a 1.5% unemployment rate, whereas people who have just a high school education have a much higher rate. And then we also correlate that with pay, and it shows that, of course, people with a higher education have higher pay than people with lower.
I think in recent years, a lot of Americans have believed just the opposite, that you can make more money if you win the lottery. Well,
Yeah.
if you're one of the 0.001% that do that, yes.
Yeah.
You have better odds if you're a high school graduate.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I can look up that data, and I'll get it as local as possible. If worse comes to worse, at least I can send you the national data, which will show that.
Commissioner Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the observations I've had in the labor market is partnerships between school districts and employers. We have several great examples. I think there's JCI, Chambers Construction, Highland Construction. These are companies that are working with school districts, students, getting them in the chair at school, but also getting them in the manufacturing realm of things. And one of the things I've spent close to 40 years as a building contractor. And my question is often, the question is often posed to me, where is the next person, the next generation, if you will, of plumbers and electricians and roofers and painters and framers? And so I'm looking for more activity in that mentoring aspect of partnering with school districts and students and the manufacturers and trades. Can you have any thoughts on that?
There is some of that happening. Lane Workforce Partnership takes training dollars and their sectors are based on, the sectors that they concentrate on are based on a few things, but one of them's labor shortage. And we've been seeing rapid growth and labor shortage in construction and in manufacturing. So advanced wood products manufacturing is one of the sectors that they're concentrating on and getting, they're giving young people tours of the manufacturing facilities to show them that it's not the hard, it's not as grungy work as it used to be. It's more technical, and you can advance into technical jobs. And they're also working with Lane Education Service District, going around to high schools, providing training. And, this is important stuff because not everybody is made for college or, wants to go to college. But, they'll make a very good person in one of the trades or in manufacturing where you can get above average wages. So there is some effort in that direction.
Thank you for that.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. And this is along more back to the housing issue. You stated that we need something above 1,300 new houses per year or new front doors per year to keep up with the growth as we've seen it. And we're not even coming close to that. However, we clearly, with the low vacancy rate, we have a demand for housing, yet we're not coming close to building the houses. Who is missing out on this? Why aren't we building the houses if there's a demand for it? I have an answer, but please.
Okay. I hear a lot of, and it's kind of like a three-pronged, and a lot of it's just anecdotal. First is confidence of builders. Second, there are some land use regulation issues. And also there are less availability of funds, investment funds for housing after the Great Recession. Banks, rightfully so, became a little less freewheeling with loaning that money out. So, that's those three things, and a lot of that's what I hear anecdotally kind of combined to slow it down.
And they all add up to the
Yeah.
if the growth is predominantly through in-migration, people aren't moving here to work at McDonald's. They're not moving here to be, as I was, the night janitor at the Trailways bus depot. That's not why they're moving here. They're moving here for upper level jobs, higher wage jobs. So they're not the people who aren't getting the homes. It's the people who are already here who are in the service industry in the lower wages jobs that become more and more constrained as to where they can live, or if indeed they can be in a home. So my answer is simple. It takes into account all of the factors that you named, but people can't afford the houses. The people who can afford the houses are moving here because somebody hired them to move here, and they were able to afford a home in that price range where homes are available.
We also have some retirement movement from California where people sell their house for a higher price and come and buy something here for less.
So they have cash available to do the same thing, which.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at the cost of housing in Lane County versus other counties, Lane County is not that high.
Right.
I mean, it really isn't. So there's the differential between what people are making and what people are earning, and the availability of housing, the simple availability. I look at Tillamook County. Well, houses cost, $80,000 more in Tillamook than they do in Eugene. What?
And it's an issue up and down the West Coast. I mean, Seattle, for a long time, had the highest single-family home cost increase in the nation. Portland was second.
Yeah.
Of course, San Francisco is starting from a high place anyway, so.
Well, the only thing that I'm hoping to attain by the questions and the statements that I'm making is that, and I'm looking at Mr. Mokrahysky right now, is that we understand that people are being forced into lower level housing or no housing at all based upon factors that really there are no knobs that we can turn to change that unless we decided that, hey, you guys, Envision Eugene wasn't quite right. We did need residential land outside the urban growth boundary, or the municipalities that aren't moving forward with allowing lower cost housing, even in Lane County where the housing is already low cost, they're not moving forward fast enough. Consequently, the kids who are graduating from high school who generally need a home unless they move someplace else, along with the retirees moving in, along with the people moving in here for their jobs, are just making it more and more difficult for people to stay in their homes. When we have a Lane County employee that I talked to not too long ago whose rent was just raised by $300 a month, but that person's wages did not go up by $300 a month, it creates an emergency that isn't statistical. You know, I mean, it's not an amalgamation. I mean, it's actual individuals who are suffering from the fact that we can't put them into housing. And once again, I'm not, please forgive me if it seems that I'm grilling you on it. You're presenting information that's very good information, but it corroborates my story and the feeling that I have that people simply can't afford to live here. And consequently, kids are getting up in the morning, going to school, not knowing where they're going to sleep that night. So, thanks.
Thanks. Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So earlier today, Brian, I talked about the fact there's becoming such a shortage in truck drivers.
Yeah.
And not only here locally, but nationally. And they're trying to figure out how do we fill that? Because I know we've been trying to put this big emphasis on rail and freight, movement of freight on rail, but the reality is truck is still king. And boy, is it ever. And so the challenge is, so I don't know if you have an additional data on that or what you're seeing out there, but I just read, in fact, I just read it to the board today. So there was an article about the Permian Basin, West Texas, because they're really pumping oil. I mean, it's really going. But they have a shortage of 3,000 to 4,000 in truck drivers that they're now offering them base beginning pay, 6 figures, plus bonus to go work in West Texas, which I will tell you right now, that's a hell of a lot better than going to North Dakota. And so that's not a bad place to go. It smells a little bit, but it's not a bad place to go. I've been through there many times. But so it's jobs like that, by the way, don't require a 4-year degree.
Right.
And it's the jobs, there's a friend of my son's, he did not graduate from high school. He just struggled in high school, but you know what he could do? He could run a forklift and run it quite well. And today, he's 25, now he's 26, makes 60 grand a year in a forklift in a manufacturing facility. Plus, he'll work hard, and he shows up on time and can pee in a cup just fine. So, and no problem there. So, I'm glad you brought up Lane Workforce Partnership, because that's some of the key. And I'm so sad to see Sue Ricky Smith leave Springfield School District because she put such an emphasis on career tech.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really where she was focusing on. And when you talk to some of our high-tech firms here, they'll tell you, I'm not looking for a person with a 4-year degree. I'm looking for somebody who will, first of all, get in, be trained, and we'll pay them. We'll take care of it, no problem there. So, those are some overall thoughts, but I guess I just kind of want to get back to, what are you seeing as far as a trend is concerned in the trucking? And I'm guessing if a recession does come, it'll probably curb that some. But right now, it's a real significant issue, and those are good paying jobs, by the way.
Right. Coming right out of the recession, we saw transportation grow rapidly. That was a sign of recovery. But it's slowed down. And, I am not sure, but I suspect that it has to do with that labor constraint. I can tell you anecdotally that I've talked to a couple of people or management at trucking companies, and they're just like, we've got great paying jobs. You just get them in here, and as you say, they got the soft skills where they can pass a drug test and show up on time.
Yeah.
It's a very high-paying job. Some of those jobs, are pretty rough. You'll be away from home for a long time.
No doubt about
Long-haul
it.
trucking is a difficult thing. So, but yeah, we see that, and I'm suspecting that some of the slowdown in growth in the transportation sector is because of labor constraint.
Which, by the way, this is kind of interesting, but it's believe it or not, it's one of the major reasons why a state like Wyoming, Utah, and others raised their speed limit to 80 because of the truck, because I-80 is if there's ever a truck route, that is a truck route. And it gets those big trucks, they just zoom right on to get them from place to place, because you're right, it's not an easy job. And it's not for everyone. There's no doubt about it. It's tough being away from your families, and that's what you do 8 hours a day is drive. And but that is a major reason why they raised the speed limit, because the trucking industry really wanted it, and they got it there. And believe me, when I was I was moving my parents' stuff out here. I was in a 26-foot truck doing about 75 miles an hour, and I had to stay in the right lane the whole time. They just blew right past me. So 80, they recommend that speed limit. That's about it.
Commissioner Sorensen.
On the topic of truck driving in our local economy, the Lane Workforce Partnership has had a program specifically for not long-haul truck driving, but for sand and gravel truck driving. And they have sponsored educational courses that will get people not only the soft skills of, showing up on time and being able to pass drug tests and being able to work with others, but also the hard skills. And there are hard skills associated with these very, very expensive trucks and very specialized to get them knowledgeable on driving the truck, but also passing their licensing, because they have to have a license to do this. Right. And that is a barrier. And one of the things that Lane Workforce Partnership has done in partnering with the local sand and gravel companies is to design a program that relatively quickly, I won't say too quickly, but relatively quickly gives people the training they need to move into those jobs. And they're not paid $80,000 a year, but they're paid quite well relative to their previous salaries. And they have to have good reading skills in order to pass the test, and there's other educational attainments that they have to get the thing done. But it is a bright spot in the local economy where we have demand for those jobs. We have the ability to make the supply, and we just need to have the training in between, and we used U.S. Department of Labor funding to do that. So that's a bright spot. But I'm interested in a more generic question for you, and that is, American economy is based upon a free enterprise system regulated by government. And some advocate more free enterprise and less government, and others advocate maybe less free enterprise and more government. But that continuum seems to be the history of our economic policy. And I'm just wondering, is there anything that a local government could do to stop that recession or to minimize it? Or is it a matter of we're at the mercy of these unseen forces that are outside of the control of a local government that administers, a land base of 4,500 square miles and a population, exceeding 360,000 people?
Yeah.
Is there anything we can really do?
I think a lot of the programs that are going on, listening to companies, looking at the numbers, seeing where training or support can be provided. But, if you look at the RV industry, that was just basically the decision of one company, two maybe, that, caused all those jobs.
Here and then locate elsewhere.
Yeah. So, a lot of it is, it's a global economy now. And so a lot
What about something as that's been successful, such as the effort to home grow businesses like Rain and other things, where we have been able to see a measurable increase in the number of people working and the economic activity because we're home growing the businesses?
Right. You're more likely to keep somebody around if they start in the area. And also some of it has to do with, your human capital. And, that gets to education, training, that sort of thing. And companies want to be here because, you have creative, hardworking people. It's valuable for them. So that may be something that local governments can influence. Infrastructure, of course, the internet cable that's gone in downtown is probably one of the reasons that the the security company is willing to locate there. It almost certainly is. So, yeah, sure. I think, it's kind of obvious that you try and improve your human capital through training and education, and you have infrastructure that will attract and keep companies here. But yeah, a lot of it is just, the global economy, the national economy, and where a company sees or feels like they're going to be a better fit.
My son wants me to ask, is Bitcoin a good investment?
I wouldn't touch it.
Okay, thank you. That's what I told him.
Hold on, Commissioner Williams
Okay.
was in the queue ahead of you.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Mr. Chair. Question about statistics, and I don't expect that there probably are because of confidentiality things, but clearly with the advent of marijuana legalization, we hear a lot about urine analysis and making sure somebody is clean when they apply for a job. My question is there any tracking of how many, through industry or through applications of employment, excuse me, are there statistics that show that with the large number of employment opportunities, a lot of people chasing after jobs, low unemployment numbers, I'm looking for the statistic on how many of those people do not get the job because they can't pass a urine analysis. As you know, the legalization of pot really changed everything in that regard. And I think it would be helpful if there was actually a tracking there to where there could be some studies done on how industry and individuals get beyond that. I wouldn't want to see one of those truck drivers going down the road after he just got off a break smoking a joint. Would not care to see that. But I think there are some things out there where maybe that could be more accommodating. I'm not advocating that. I'm just thinking that there are people that are employed that are being shut out because of the marijuana legalization and drug testing. So I know that's kind of a rambling thing, and there's probably not statistics there, and I'm thinking that employers probably would be reluctant to put out data that, well, gee, we had 100 interviews this last year, and guess what? 75% of them washed out because they couldn't pass a marijuana.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any statistics. I can look into it a little bit.
Well, it just seems like one of those, another tool.
I know anecdotally, employers are treating it now more as alcohol. It's like if they test positive after an accident or something like that, then they're fired. The problem is with the testing, I guess, marijuana will stay in your system for weeks as opposed to alcohol. You can pretty much tell if a person is intoxicated or not at the time. So that might be something going forward is, an improvement in the testing. So it can be treated more like alcohol so that, if a person, you have proof that a person is intoxicated or not at the time.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lycan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, all right, Brian, I'm going to ask your opinion on the whole tariff issue. Just real, if you can just, give it about a 3-minute answer. I know it could probably be about an hour answer. But anyway, first of all, I'm going to just say the whole spat between the Prime Minister of Canada and the President, to me, that's myself and my brother screaming at each other after the Civil War game because he's a beaver and I'm a duck. I honestly, let's get over it, folks. It's not that big of a deal. It really isn't. But I will say on the tariff issue, and part of it is because growing up around the wood products industry, and many of these folks have been personal friends for a long time, and I got to tell you, there's been so much pushback on Canadian lumber, and because it is subsidized. And we're hearing more and more over and over again that the rebuilding that's going on down in Houston and Puerto Rico and these other places, it's Canadian lumber rebuilding and not our lumber. And so so if you were to ask a lot of the folks in the industry today, especially, and I'm going to point out wood products. I know they've talked milk and other things, but I'm going to point out wood products. There was a big celebration when Commerce Secretary Ross probably not more than 2 months after he was in, as the secretary, immediately put duties on Canadian lumber. And that's been a significant issue. So, overall, the spat, folks get past it. It's not that big of a deal. But on the tariffs itself, there's been a real issue, and especially around the wood products industry. Maybe just get your thoughts on just specifically on that piece. You don't need to comment about the spat going on between the Prime Minister and the President, but maybe on just the tariff issue, and because this directly affects Oregon
Right.
and what's going on here. So just your thoughts.
Well, as long as I've been following the wood products industry, about 20 years now, there's been tension between the United States and Canada, and Canada's timber is subsidized, and they have a supply advantage. So one thing that's going on right now is that the mills, everybody I talk to in the mills are saying we just need more logs.
Yeah, they do.
And, then we'd be ramping up production because prices are way high. Record prices in wood products. And, there are other issues, but the supply of logs is an issue. And there's a little bit, so wherever it comes from, it helps the local industry if they can ramp up production. There is a problem with supply, a couple of problems going on. First, forest fires, and then secondly, pine beetle. So there are some natural things going on reducing supply. But, I don't know how much at this stage of the game in the economy, how much Canadian lumber is going to suppress the amount of Oregon lumber that's bought. This demand is very high right now.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that. It's pretty complicated.
Yeah.
And that's why we could be
Yeah.
here an hour talking about it. But but I just want to get your general thoughts. And one last thing I'll say, you and I have known each other since I was mayor, and so I just want to say I really appreciate the work you do. The information that you provide is very, very helpful. And so. I just want to say thank you very much for all the years that I've known you, and the work that you do on behalf, especially as our regional guy. I got to tell you, we're pretty fortunate,
Oh,
and
great.
so appreciate that, Brian. And again, thanks for being here.
Great.
So I have a couple things I was going to get to. I was just letting some of the other commissioners jump in first, but I want to just real quick before we leave the whole thought of housing, put a table up there that had the population growth for Lane County and then for various cities.
Yeah.
One of your slides. The interesting thing about that and is to look, look where the highest number of people were added and the highest percentage. That's not where it's supposed to be going according to the state land use laws. Something is wrong with that picture and shows how out of whack we currently are right now with our supplying land, residential land available for development inside of urban growth boundaries and the difficulty of addressing that. But it also shows a huge potential if we can get the state to we've got a potential piece of legislation for the 19th session that would give us the ability to add accessory dwelling units in the unincorporated areas, a permissive law that would allow us to add that. Just shows the potential out there. If we can add 2,000 people in unincorporated without accessory dwelling units, how many more people could we accommodate with accessory dwelling units? So it'll be interesting to see also as we implement the earlier bill that mandated it inside of UGBs, how that changes, and maybe that'll swing some of that growth back into the UGBs. But that it's just, there's obviously something wrong with the system when we can supply more housing in unincorporated areas where it's not supposed to go in this county than the rest of the basically the majority of the growth has been in unincorporated Lane County. Just a comment there. But I wanted to get back to your third slide, I think, which was your pie chart. of jobs and are showing the diversity of our economy. So we often see this pie chart, and this is by jobs. And one of the things that it doesn't really reflect is that really truly the portion of the economy? Because one of the things that does not reflect is the difference between portions of our economy that exchange wealth versus portions of our local economy that create wealth.
Right.
So, yeah, and you understand what I'm probably going to get at here a little bit is what's really driving our economy. When we look at government, education, health services, that's exchanging wealth between people. We're not creating anything new.
I would say health services, that's why I point out we've become a regional, it's kind of like a small export industry where we have people coming
Somewhat people
surrounding
coming,
towns.
even so, they have to have created wealth somewhere else to come here and exchange their wealth.
Yeah.
There's no creation of there's no new wealth being created in that industry. So if you were to try and maybe in the future, next quarter, if you could bring this pie chart that is more by value of the industry rather than number of jobs.
Yes.
My guess is that mining and logging piece suddenly gets
Yeah.
a lot bigger than 1%. And when you get right down to it, and that kind of,
If you look at payroll also, mining and logging and manufacturing have a bigger piece of the pie just because they're above average wages.
right, there's some way of trying to represent that. And then maybe also identifying what's creating wealth versus what's exchanging wealth. Because to me, that's really, when you talk about surviving downturns and all that stuff, if you can attract wealth creators into your locality, you're more likely to be able to sustain an economy through a recession because you're creating wealth in your local area.
Right.
Versus if you're highly dependent on people that exchange wealth and the economy drops, there's no possibility,
Right, 'cause
of
they're
not
dependent
being
on one
impacted
another.
from outside forces.
Right, sure.
So really, that's kind of something that, because I was going to get to that trade policy question a little bit differently, because one of the things I see is that is one of the threats to the global economy and could be the thing that kicks that recession. And it's kind of funny when Commissioner Sorensen asked you about, can you predict the next recession? My answer would have been after the second straight quarter of negative growth. That's when
Right.
that's when the recession begins.
And unfortunately, we don't know that until it's happened.
Yeah. But textbook definition. But for me, that whole issue of tariffs and all that, as we look at that, it gets to a point where it's really one of the things people think is we place a tariff on a foreign country, it's punishing that foreign country. What people really don't understand is actually a tax on our citizens. The people that pay that tariff is not the foreign country. It's our actual consumers here in this country pay that tariff. So as we talk about throwing tariffs on other countries, we're actually talking about raising prices for everyone.
You're raising prices to
Right.
try and reduce demand.
And as we're talking, and we obviously understand that in the housing market because we're just talking about why the housing market's, inflating it higher than wage growth and what needs to happen there, which is more supply and those things. And what tariffs do is artificially do what we're happening with the restriction of supply.
Oh, so, yeah.
Yeah, by raising prices in multiple ways. It allows domestic producers to raise their price because they can now compete at a higher price, and it also raises the cost of the foreign good and anything made from those things. So I really hope that most of the tariff talk is posturing to get to actually a greater level of free trade in our global economy. That's my hope. But if that turns into we're doing this because we're back into the late 20s and early 30s, and we're trying to be protectionists and all that stuff, I think we're headed in the wrong direction. But which one of the things that's a bright shining star in our local economy is some of our traded sector. You look at Johnson Crushers.
Yeah.
They're trading internationally. You look at our filbert industry, which we talked about with the extension folks here this morning. that's an international trade item. You know, that's really, and that's creating wealth. Both of those industries are creating wealth and bringing wealth into our community, which then gets exchanged for all those other things like healthcare and education and pays for government, you know. But you got to create the wealth in the first place to pay for all those things. So those tariffs threaten those traded sector jobs. And that's what's really scary about it. So it'd be interesting if, you know, next time you come back, if you could kind of maybe have a couple different versions of what that pie looks like relative to value to our economy.
Right, we can look at domestic product by industry, and we can look at payroll by industry also. That'll give an indication of how much wealth and how much money it's putting into the economy
Right.
by industry.
Great, I appreciate that. And I think we've gone way beyond the 45 minutes we estimated for this item.
It's always interesting.
Yeah, it's some pent-up economic demand apparently.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons why we asked you to come back more regularly, so maybe it won't quite be so bad next time. But yeah, you can obviously tell there's a lot of interest in economics, you know, by local governments because it has such great impact on us
Sure.
and great impact on our citizens. So I really appreciate you coming and sharing your knowledge with us, and the rest of staff that's waiting for the next item, being patient with us as we ask a bunch of crazy questions with agendas behind them.
What?
So yeah. Oops, did I say that out loud? Yeah. Was
Great
that,
discussion, though.
yeah, was that the outside voice? Yeah, so I really appreciate it. Any other questions or comments from the board? I really appreciate your time, Brian,
Yeah.
and thank you for coming, and thank you, Christine, for being patient. You did 5 minutes and then sat there while we talked with Brian.
very
So thank you very much. I think we'll move on to our next item, and we hope to see you soon.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, we'll now move on to item 15A, which is a Public Works item, which is Order 1806-1215 in the matter of approving the vacation of certain alleys located adjacent to Lane County owned properties identified as assessors maps and tax lots numbers 1703, 3111, 2800, and 3200, and granting the authority to the county administrator to execute documents related to the vacation. And I believe these tax lots I just numbered are actually the parcels at 6th and Oak. Is that correct? Just so folks know out there that I'm not trying to hide the location by reading tax lot numbers, that we're talking about the parcels that we are anticipating a 99-year lease with the Obie companies.
That is accurate.
So, Greg, take it away.
Chair Bosovich, Commissioners, thank you for this opportunity. I am joined by the County Surveyor, Jay Blomay, and it is very likely that should we wander into legal concerns, we will have Jim Cheney from County Council join us as well. We are here this afternoon because the Board of County Commissioners is being asked to approve a request from Market District LLC to request the City of Eugene to vacate certain alleys adjacent to the Lane County-owned properties and to authorize the county administrator to execute any documents related to that vacation. In order to facilitate development of the county-owned parking lot located on the north side of 7th Avenue between Oak and Pearl Streets, the board is being asked to approve vacation of the alley that splits the block that runs east and west.
North side of 6th Avenue.
No, I'm sorry, yes, north side of 6th Avenue. That splits the block that runs east and west, and the southern portion of the alley that splits the block running north and south. So consider it in the shape of a T in that block. This is necessary to effectively utilize the block in constructing 3 separate buildings, a 127-unit apartment complex, the Gordon Hotel, and a covered retail market. The construction of the 3 buildings represents an investment of an estimated $60 million. A little bit of history. In 2012, the county chose to optimize the use of these county-owned lots currently used as parking lots along 6th Avenue. The county engaged in a public process soliciting requests for proposals for public-private partnerships, mixed-use development. The county selected and accordingly executed an agreement with Market District LLC and the Housing Authority, now known as Homes for Good. The developers hold an option to lease the annex property for 99 years. The Market District plans rely on the alleys being vacated to accommodate design features and the building footprints. Vacating the alleys will facilitate the development by adding more acreage to the usable area to be developed while adding land back onto the tax rolls. The project will increase the ease and safety of pedestrian and vehicular circulation in the area. The alleys to be vacated are in the City of Eugene's jurisdiction, and as such, the application to vacate will be processed and considered by the city. Due to the paving that occurred in 1929, they are considered improved alleys. The application requires that 2/3 of adjacent and nearby property owners provide written consent to that vacation. Those approvals have been obtained and will ultimately be used as a basis to approve or deny the application. If the City of Eugene approves the vacation, ownership of the southerly half of the east-west alley and the entirety of the north-south alley will vest to Lane County. Ownership of the north half of the east-west alley will vest to the Market District as that firm owns the half-block property to the north. The City of Eugene assesses fees for the costs of the application process as well as the market value of property to be vacated. The actual amount of those fees will only be established and agreed after the application is submitted and calculated upon the area to be vacated. So we do not have those numbers for you today. Depending upon the final cost-sharing agreement reached with the Market District, the county will be responsible for all or part of the vacation fees and will receive fee title to the portion of the vacated property returned to the county's ownership. Ultimately, the Market District will be required to repay the county for the costs of the alley vacation, either through an immediate contribution toward the costs, through an increased rent to be received by the county for the lease, or a combination of the two. The Market District has until 2018 to exercise its options to lease. The county staff will negotiate a written agreement protecting the county from financial loss in the event the Market District does not exercise its lease. The vacation is considered critical to being able to start development. The Market District must have the alleys vacated and the property lines reconfigured to correspond with the actual building footprints prior to receiving building permits and commencing with construction. In order to carry out the vacation and protect the county's interests, county staff will likely be authorized to negotiate and enter into an agreement with the Market District regarding the allocation of ownership and costs for the vacation to be in place prior to the city's actions, on the application for vacation. And I see we have been joined by Jim Cheney. Should we have questions? We also have with us today Jenny Olam representing the Market District. Should questions proceed that the Market District is best able to answer.
So any questions for staff from the board? I think it's pretty clear. And I also think even if for some reason the project would fall apart and we end up back in possession of the property after the vacation, the added value is good for the property in the long run, makes it actually more marketable if we go through this process. So the cost of the actual process is worth doing whether we were working with the Market District or we just owned it ourselves. So I think it's actually an opportunity we wouldn't have had if it weren't for the project with the Market District, because we do have to get their approval for the east-west alley vacation portion, because you have to have the 2/3 of the property owners. So I think it's a great opportunity and a good thing to advance at this time. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. And regarding the cost of retaining or returning ownership to Lane County, is that based on market value per square foot?
The short
And Jim actually has answered this question before, so I kind of know the answer, but I have another tongue-in-cheek question surrounding that.
Yes, Commissioner Farr.
Yeah.
The cost per square foot I don't think, I believe, and I wasn't involved in the meeting with the city, but I believe there's not a specified set of criteria for what that value is. We're hoping to pay as little as possible, of course.
Negotiate as good a price as possible. And, I was on the city council for a lot of years, and every year we said, we're not going to improve the alleys. We're not going to grade the alleys. And every year, since 1929, evidently, the alleys just got worse and worse and worse, unless the adjacent owners did some improvement work. So the question then, the cost of returning ownership to Lane County could, in fact, be directly proportional to the cost of renting space inside the public service building, perhaps? No, that's a bad question, never mind.
Chair Bosevich, Commissioner Farr, I will say that we had to dig a little bit on the alley itself to discover the improvement.
Yeah.
So the 1929, there's a fair amount of time has passed since that was last paved.
Commissioner Lycan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just really want to say thank you again. Good work by staff. And Jim, you've been involved in not only have a piece of this, but the courthouse, what's going on here. This is really, if you look at the potential that Lane County, where we've had our fingertips on, this project, the potential of the courthouse project, I mean, here in the next few years, this isn't going to be really an incredible opportunity to transform this entire area. And what's great about it is that Lane County is having such a significant piece of helping to transform this area. And I also want a big shout out to Brian Craner for all the work that he did previous and where we are today. So I mean, this is going to be a pretty easy one for me to vote yes on and to start moving this, continue to move this project forward. But I just want to say, really, very, very good work. Just in it's the small things. This is what I view as one of the small things, but yet it has such significance with regards to the project. So, I mean, when you're talking about alleys, I mean, you're really not talking something large, but when you look at what it means for the project as a whole, you know what? It'll end up being very large. So I just want to say thank you very much for all the work that you've done. And Jay, thank you very much for your work as well. Appreciate it.
Chair Bosevich, Commissioner Lycan, I would state as we talk about, certainly with the last conversation, we talk about where residents in Lane County live and the fact that the urban core is really lacking in residential options to have homes for good, and this effort to put 127 rental units in the core is a great thing. And the apartment complex itself, and the design lays over that alley. So that's one of the reasons. The apartment complex in particular is the reason for this alley vacation.
And nothing against student housing. This isn't.
Correct.
So any other questions for staff? If not, I'll entertain a motion on Order 1806-1215. Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to move approval order 1806-1215 in the matter of approving the vacation of certain alleys located adjacent to Lane County-owned properties identified as assessors map and tax lot numbers 1703, 3111, 2800, and 3200, and granting authority to the county administrator to execute documents related to the vacation.
Second?
So it's been moved by Commissioner Lycan, seconded by Commissioner Williams to approve the order. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that moves us on to review of assignments. So, Mr.
Okay,
Burkheister.
I have three, but first I'll remind the board that we have a work session tomorrow at 1 p.m. Sometimes we start at 1:30, so just remember we have a work session on the AFSCME mid-market contract review at 1 p.m. in the Board of Commissioners conference room upstairs. I have three assignments here. Commissioner Farr's request for a report back on the potential uses of the armory at the MLK facility, understanding the existing constraints there. Secondly, a request to have the OSU extension come back potentially on a quarterly basis on single issues for more in-depth discussion on their use of recent levy funds. And then third, a report back, and it sounds like a more regular series of reports back from the Public Safety Coordinating Council on best practices for various investments and initiatives that they're involved with. So we can talk to agenda team, I think, maybe about how to sequence those last two items.
Great. I think that's all I remember. Any others for the board? And I assume we're going to be seeing Mr. Rooney again.
Yeah, we have him coming back twice a year at this stage, although your conversation today maybe begs the question whether or not we should have him more. Really good discussion. In hindsight, I wish we would have had him come after the 26th when they had the forecast data, but I don't know that we were aware of that. The intent at this point is to have him come once to the board meeting, I think, and then once at our leadership. So like in the summer time frame, and then at our leadership budget kickoff in January, which is what we did last year. So we may be able to try to get him to come one other time. I know that the data gets stale at some point, so it takes a while for the economic data to come in and be really solid. So having him come 3 or 4 times a year is probably not going to be meaningful, but at least 2 times a year we have him coming.
Yeah. I wonder if maybe just this one time, if we may see if he'd be willing to come back just to present on the forecast alone.
Yeah.
Might be a good invitation just to talk about the forecast and not all the rest of the stuff we got involved in, because I think understanding the forecast would be helpful to the board.
Maybe late. What do you think about later this summer, early fall would be a good late August, September time around Labor Day.
Yeah. Because as we discuss what's the future of the CPI and where we are with everything from labor negotiations to how we are setting up some of our finances for the county.
Yep.
I think that projection would be very useful for the board to understand and not let it get stale. So that may be the one time I think I'd like to invite him back just for a single item, maybe sooner, so maybe we can work that out. Great. Any other assignments? Any other business for the board today?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if I may, just a quick clarification regarding my request this morning for support and travel to the National Association of Counties meeting in July. The travel will be paid for predominantly out of my split between this year's and next year's office allocation. There may be a small amount that will come from the new policy that we have regarding board travel, where there is a fixed amount set for the board, and it is divided evenly among the board for travel.
Is Pat the only one going?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't see an issue with that at all.
Okay.
No,
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
it's good to have representation.
Well, and he's also presenting on some really good
absolutely.
things for Lane County, I think.
I agree.
Great. So if there's no other business for the board today, we are adjourned, and I will see you tomorrow at 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock.